The early morning sun cast long shadows across the private aviation terminal of Atlanta International Airport as Dr. Michelle Thompson pulled up in her sleek black Mercedes S-Class. It was 6:30 a.m., and the air was crisp with the promise of a warm spring day ahead. She had chosen to arrive early for her 7:30 a.m. flight, always preferring to be punctual, a habit that had served her well throughout her successful medical career. Dr. Thompson looked every bit the accomplished professional she was. At 35, she carried herself with quiet confidence, wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue pantsuit and comfortable yet elegant black heels. Her natural hair was styled in a neat professional manner, and her minimal jewelry, just a pair of small diamond studs and her mother's vintage watch, spoke of understated elegance. As she gathered her leather briefcase and small carry-on luggage from the car, the parking valet rushed forward to assist her. "Good morning, ma'am," he said with genuine warmth, noting her kind smile and the way she thanked him by name after reading his badge. Dr. Thompson always made it a point to acknowledge service staff with respect, something she had learned from her parents who had worked hard all their lives to put her through medical school. Inside her briefcase were the results of her latest research on pediatric neurosurgery techniques, which she had just presented at 3 major medical conferences across the country. The presentations had been a huge success, with her innovative surgical method already being adopted by several prestigious hospitals. Tomorrow morning, she was scheduled to perform a critical surgery using this very technique on a 7-year-old patient with a rare brain condition. The private aviation terminal was quiet at this hour, with just a few early morning flights scheduled. The modern building's glass walls reflected the sunrise, and the sound of distant jet engines created a soft background hum. Inside, 2 businessmen in expensive suits sat in the waiting area, absorbed in their phones, while the flight crew walked past, discussing their upcoming route. Dr. Thompson checked her phone one last time, reviewing the email from her hospital about tomorrow's surgery. The patient's parents had been waiting months for this operation, and she wanted to ensure everything was perfectly prepared. She had chosen to fly private today, not out of luxury, but necessity. Her young patient's surgery couldn't risk any delays that commercial flights might cause. As she walked toward the terminal entrance, Dr. Thompson noticed her reflection in the glass doors. She saw what she always saw: a dedicated doctor, a respected researcher, and a woman who had worked incredibly hard to reach the top of her field. Her father's words from her medical school graduation echoed in her mind. "Excellence is the best response to prejudice." Those words had guided her through many challenging moments in her career. The morning air was filled with the distinct smell of jet fuel and fresh coffee from the terminal's small cafe. Dr. Thompson could see her chartered jet through the large windows, being prepared for departure. The sight made her think about how far she had come from her childhood in a modest neighborhood in South Atlanta, where private jets were something she only saw flying overhead. She straightened her jacket and grasped her flight documents, which included her credentials, pilot-approved passenger manifest, and chartered flight details, all organized in her usual methodical manner. As one of the few black female neurosurgeons in the country, Dr. Thompson had learned to always be over-prepared, to have every document ready, to be beyond reproach in every situation. Little did she know that despite all her preparation, despite her credentials, her achievements, and her rightful place in this terminal, she was about to face a situation that would test her composure and dignity in ways she hadn't expected. As she reached for the door handle, she noticed a security guard inside watching her with an expression she had seen too many times before, a look of suspicion and prejudice that no amount of professional success seemed able to erase completely. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and Dr. Thompson stepped forward, unaware that the next few minutes would not only change her morning, but would become a catalyst for change in the entire private aviation industry. Security guard James Miller stood at his post inside the private aviation terminal, where he had worked for the past 8 years. At 52, he was known among his coworkers for being strict about following what he thought were proper procedures. Though the terminal management had recently conducted diversity training sessions, Miller had attended them with visible reluctance, often muttering under his breath about changing times. As he watched Dr. Thompson approach through the glass doors, Miller immediately straightened up. His face hardened into what he considered his professional expression, what others might recognize as barely hidden prejudice. Without waiting for her to reach the security desk, he moved quickly to intercept her at the entrance. "Excuse me, ma'am, Miller called out loudly, making several heads turn in the quiet terminal. The main passenger terminal is that way. He pointed toward the commercial airport entrance, speaking slowly as if explaining something to a child. This is a private aviation facility. Dr. Thompson took a deep breath, one she had practiced many times in similar situations. "Good morning," she replied calmly, reaching for her identification and flight documents. "I'm Dr. Michelle Thompson. I have a private charter scheduled for 7:30 a.m. Miller didn't even glance at the documents she was trying to show him. Instead, he moved to block her path completely, his hand resting near his security radio in a way that felt unnecessarily threatening. "Ma'am, I've worked here long enough to know who belongs and who doesn't. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The two businessmen who had been sitting in the waiting area looked up from their phones, their expressions a mix of discomfort and curiosity. A young flight attendant who was walking by slowed down, sensing the tension in the air. The morning sun streaming through the windows cast long shadows across the polished floor, highlighting the growing scene. "Sir," Dr. Thompson said, maintaining her professional tone, "I understand you're doing your job, but I have all my documentation right here." She held up her leather portfolio. "You can easily verify my flight details and identification." Miller crossed his arms, making himself appear larger. "Listen here, I don't need to check anything. I know every flight scheduled this morning, and I know you're not supposed to be here. Now, you can either leave on your own, or I can call for backup." Dr. Thompson felt her heart rate increase, but years of performing complex surgeries under pressure had taught her to stay calm in stressful situations. She noticed more people gathering around them, pilots, other passengers, and terminal staff. Some had begun recording the interaction on their phones. "Please," she said firmly, "check my documentation. I'm a neurosurgeon headed home for an important surgery tomorrow morning. This is my chartered flight." She tried again to show him her papers, but Miller took a step back as if she were trying to hand him something dangerous. "A neurosurgeon?" Miller let out a dismissive laugh that echoed through the now quiet terminal. "Right. And I'm the President of the United States." He reached for his radio, pressing the call button. "Security desk to dispatch. I need backup at the main entrance. We have an unauthorized individual refusing to leave." The young flight attendant who had been watching stepped closer, her face showing concern. "Sir, maybe we should just check her documents." But Miller waved her away sharply. Dr. Thompson stood her ground, even as she felt the familiar weight of prejudice pressing down on her shoulders. She thought about her patient waiting for tomorrow's surgery, about her parents who had taught her to face discrimination with dignity, about all the young black girls who dreamed of becoming doctors. "I'm not leaving," she stated clearly, her voice carrying across the terminal. "I have every right to be here, and I insist you either verify my credentials or call your supervisor immediately." Miller's face reddened at her refusal to back down. "Security is on their way," he said, his voice tight with anger. "This is your last chance to leave quietly." Around them, more phones were recording, more people were gathering, and the morning sun continued to rise, illuminating a scene that would soon become much bigger than either of them expected. The tension in the private aviation terminal continued to build as Dr. Thompson stood her ground. The morning sunlight now filled the space, and the small crowd of onlookers had grown to include pilots, passengers, and terminal staff. The soft hum of whispered conversations mixed with the sound of distant jet engines. "This is ridiculous," came a voice from the crowd. It belonged to Mark Chen, a tech executive who frequently used the terminal. He stepped forward, his tablet in hand. "I've seen Dr. Thompson on the cover of Medical Innovation Weekly. She's one of the top neurosurgeons in the country." Miller's face tightened, but he couldn't move from his position blocking Dr. Thompson's path. "Sir, please stay back. This is a security matter." He kept his hand firmly on his radio, still treating Dr. Thompson as a threat rather than a legitimate passenger. Dr. Thompson pulled out her phone and opened her email. "I can show you the flight confirmation from your own company. It was sent to me yesterday." Her voice remained steady, though inside she felt a familiar mix of frustration and determination. A young pilot named Sarah walked over, her uniform crisp and professional. "I'm scheduled to fly the 7:30 charter to Boston," she said, looking at Miller with disapproval. "We were told to expect Dr. Thompson this morning. She's our passenger." Miller's face reddened further, but he stood his ground. Anyone can make fake documents these days. Anyone can pretend to be someone they're not. He glanced at Dr. Thompson's expensive suit and added, anyone can dress up and act like they belong. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. More phones were recording now, capturing every word of the interaction. A group of flight attendants huddled together, one of them urgently typing on her phone, likely messaging the terminal management. Dr. Thompson thought about her patient, 7-year-old Emma, waiting for tomorrow's surgery. She couldn't let this man's prejudice delay her return home. Taking another deep breath, she spoke clearly and firmly. I'm going to call my medical office right now. They can verify my identity, and then they'll be calling the hospital's legal team. She began dialing, her fingers steady despite the situation. The terminal's front desk phone started ringing at the same time. Miller glanced nervously at it but didn't move to answer it. Mark Chen spoke up again. I'm calling the aviation company's corporate office right now. This is absolutely unacceptable. He held up his phone, showing he was already on hold with someone important. 2 more security guards arrived, responding to Miller's earlier call for backup. They looked confused at the scene before them, a well-dressed professional woman holding documentation, an angry guard, and a crowd of concerned onlookers. James, what's going on here? Asked one of the new guards, Officer Roberts. He was younger than Miller and had actually paid attention during the recent diversity training sessions. Before Miller could answer, Dr. Thompson calmly addressed Officer Roberts. I'm trying to board my scheduled private charter flight. I have all the necessary documentation, but Officer Miller refuses to even look at it. Roberts stepped forward and respectfully asked to see her documents. As he began reviewing them, Miller interrupted, You can't seriously be considering this. She just walked in here like she owned the place. Because I have every right to be here, Dr. Thompson responded, her voice carrying across the now silent terminal. And your assumptions about me say more about you than they do about me. The terminal's front desk phone kept ringing. Through the windows, they could see several more people rushing toward the building, including someone wearing a manager's badge. Officer Roberts finished checking Dr. Thompson's documentation. His face showed a mix of embarrassment and professionalism as he turned to Miller. These credentials are completely legitimate. Dr. Thompson is indeed scheduled for the 7:30 a.m. charter to Boston. Miller's face went from red to pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The young pilot, Sarah, stepped forward again. Dr. Thompson, would you like me to escort you to your aircraft? We can begin boarding now. Before anyone could move, the terminal doors opened and Mrs. Sarah Chen, the terminal manager, rushed in. One look at the scene. The crowd, the phones recording, Dr. Thompson's dignified stance, and Miller's hostile position told her everything she needed to know. The morning sun had fully risen now, illuminating what was about to become a pivotal moment of accountability and change. Mrs. Sarah Chen, the terminal manager, walked quickly toward the group, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She had just received multiple urgent messages about the situation, including one from corporate headquarters. Behind her followed 2 more people, the regional director of aviation services, Mr. James Wilson, who happened to be visiting that morning, and the head of terminal security. What is going on here? Mrs. Chen's voice was sharp and professional. Her eyes moved from Miller's defensive stance to Dr. Thompson's calm presence, then to the crowd of passengers and staff recording everything on their phones. Before anyone could answer, a woman pushed through the crowd. Oh my God, Dr. Thompson, she called out, tears forming in her eyes. You saved my daughter's life last year. It was Maria Rodriguez, whose daughter had suffered from a rare brain condition that other doctors had deemed inoperable. Miller shifted uncomfortably, but still tried to defend his actions. I was just following security protocols. By refusing to check her documentation. Officer Roberts interrupted, holding up Dr. Thompson's perfectly valid credentials. That's not protocol, that's profiling. The regional director, Mr. Wilson, stepped forward. His face showed deep concern as he addressed Dr. Thompson. Doctor, I sincerely apologize for this situation. I've just gotten off the phone with our corporate office. They're horrified by what's happening here. Mrs. Rodriguez was now standing next to Dr. Thompson. This woman is a miracle worker. My Sophie had 3 other doctors say nothing could be done, but Dr. Thompson developed a new surgical technique just to help her. Sophie's now back in school, playing soccer. The terminal had grown even more crowded. Pilots, passengers, and staff had all stopped to watch. Someone in the crowd called out, "I saw her on CNN last month. She won an award for medical innovation." Dr. Thompson remained composed, though her eyes showed both frustration and determination. "All I want is to board my flight so I can return home for tomorrow's surgery. I have a 7-year-old patient waiting for me." Mr. Wilson turned to Miller, his expression stern. "Officer Miller, please surrender your security badge and radio. You're suspended effective immediately, pending a full investigation." Miller's face went pale. "But sir, I was just—" "Just what?" Mrs. Chen interrupted. "Just refusing to follow basic security protocols, just ignoring valid documentation, just harassing one of the most respected neurosurgeons in the country." The head of terminal security stepped forward to collect Miller's badge. The crowd watched as Miller slowly unpinned it, his hands shaking slightly. The reality of his actions was finally sinking in. "Dr. Thompson," Mr. Wilson said, "would you be willing to meet with me briefly in my office? I want to personally ensure nothing like this ever happens again in our facilities." A young black girl, watching everything with her parents from nearby, stared at Dr. Thompson with wide, admiring eyes. Dr. Thompson noticed her and gave her a warm smile, remembering her own childhood dreams of becoming a doctor despite all the obstacles society placed in her way. Mrs. Rodriguez was still speaking to anyone who would listen. "She doesn't just perform surgeries, she invents new ways to save lives, and this is how she's treated." The videos taken by witnesses were already being shared online. Phones throughout the terminal buzzed with notifications as the incident began trending on social media. The story was spreading rapidly, forcing an uncomfortable but necessary conversation about prejudice in professional spaces. Dr. Thompson checked her watch, thinking about her patient waiting at home. "Mr. Wilson, I appreciate your offer to meet, but I have a critical surgery scheduled for tomorrow morning. Perhaps we could arrange a video call later this week." "Of course, doctor. Please, let us escort you to your flight immediately." He turned to the pilot, Sarah. "Make sure Dr. Thompson has everything she needs for a comfortable journey." As they began walking toward the terminal's private gates, the young girl who had been watching stepped forward. "Dr. Thompson," she said shyly, "I want to be a doctor too." Dr. Thompson stopped and knelt down to the girl's level. "You can be anything you want to be," she said softly. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The morning sun now streamed fully through the terminal's windows, illuminating not just an incident of prejudice, but a moment of change, inspiration, and the power of standing up for what's right. As Dr. Thompson walked toward her flight, escorted by Mr. Wilson and Mrs. Chen, more people began approaching them. The terminal had become surprisingly busy, with news of the incident spreading quickly through the aviation community. What happened next would change not just one airport's policies, but would spark a nationwide conversation. A tall man in an expensive suit hurried over. "Dr. Thompson, I can't believe it's you." The man was Richard Palmer, CEO of one of the largest hospital networks in the country. "I was just reading your research paper on innovative pediatric surgical techniques last night. We're hoping you'll consider partnering with our hospitals." Before Dr. Thompson could respond, another voice called out. This time it was Dr. Sarah Jenkins, a leading medical researcher. "Michelle, I was going to call you today. Your new surgical technique for treating brain tumors in children, it's revolutionary. We've already saved 3 lives using your method at Boston Children's Hospital." Mr. Wilson listened to these interactions with growing dismay, realizing even more deeply the magnitude of Miller's mistake. Here was a woman who was literally saving children's lives, and she had been treated like an intruder. A group of flight attendants approached, led by Lisa Martinez, who had been quietly recording the earlier confrontation. "Dr. Thompson, we've already contacted several news outlets. They're very interested in covering this story. Would you be willing to speak about what happened?" Dr. Thompson paused thoughtfully. "This isn't about me," she said. "This is about every qualified professional who has faced discrimination. If sharing my story can help create change, then yes, I'll speak about it." Mrs. Chen's phone buzzed continuously with messages from corporate headquarters. The videos had already gone viral on social media, with hashtags like #RespectToThompson and #BlackExcellence trending nationally. "Doctor," Mr. Wilson said, looking deeply troubled, I just received word that our CEO wants to speak with you personally. She's horrified by what happened and wants to discuss implementing new training programs across all our facilities. As they walked, they passed the young black girl from earlier, who was now excitedly telling her parents, "See? Black doctors are amazing." Dr. Thompson smiled, remembering her own childhood role models who had helped her believe in her dreams. The pilot, Sarah, joined them with some surprising news. "Dr. Thompson, you won't believe this, but 3 other physicians on their way to different terminals heard what happened. They're all demanding investigations into their own experiences with discrimination at various aviation facilities." Richard Palmer spoke up again. "This needs to be addressed industry-wide. I sit on the board of several aviation companies. We'll be discussing this at our next meeting." He handed Dr. Thompson his business card. "We need your input on making systematic changes." A terminal employee rushed up with a stack of papers. "Dr. Thompson, these just came through. They're letters of support from medical associations across the country. They started coming in as soon as the videos went viral." Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been following them, added, "My Sophie made a video about how you saved her life. It's already got thousands of shares. People need to know who you really are." Dr. Thompson's phone buzzed with a message from her hospital. The board of directors had issued a strong statement supporting her and condemning the discrimination she had faced. They were already planning to use this incident in their own diversity training programs. As they reached the private gate area, Mr. Wilson turned to Dr. Thompson. "Doctor, I want you to know that we're not just going to issue empty apologies. We're implementing immediate changes. Miller's actions today revealed systemic problems that we need to address." Dr. Thompson looked at her watch again, thinking of little Emma waiting for tomorrow's surgery. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she said wisely, "but it happens one step at a time, one person at a time, one action at a time." The private jet stood waiting on the tarmac, its engine starting to hum. The morning sun reflected off its polished surface, symbolic of the brightness that can come from even the darkest situations. What had started as an incident of discrimination was transforming into a catalyst for change, awareness, and hope. As Dr. Thompson prepared to board her flight, she knew that this morning's events would have an impact far beyond one security guard's actions or one terminal's policies. Sometimes, standing your ground with dignity can create ripples that turn into waves of change. The news of what happened at Atlanta International Airport's private terminal spread like wildfire across social media and news outlets. By the time Dr. Thompson's private jet reached cruising altitude, her phone was filled with hundreds of messages of support and interview requests from major networks. Sarah, the pilot, came back to the passenger cabin with a tablet in hand. "Dr. Thompson, you might want to see this," she said, showing her a live news broadcast. The headline read, "Renowned neurosurgeon faced discrimination at private airport terminal. Nationwide response demands change." Dr. Thompson watched as various medical professionals appeared on screen, sharing their own experiences with discrimination. Dr. James Carter, a black cardiologist from Chicago, spoke passionately. "What happened to Dr. Thompson happens to professionals of color every day, but she stood her ground with dignity and showed everyone what real excellence looks like." The flight attendant brought Dr. Thompson a cup of tea and shared something surprising. "Ma'am, you should know that private aviation staff across the country are sharing your story in their group chats. Many are coming forward with similar incidents they've witnessed. They're demanding better training and stricter policies." Meanwhile, back at the terminal, things were moving quickly. The aviation company's CEO, Patricia Martinez, had called an emergency board meeting. The videos of Miller's behavior had already reached millions of views across different platforms. Dr. Thompson's hospital released an official statement. "Dr. Michelle Thompson is not just one of our most valued surgeons. She is a pioneer in pediatric neurosurgery who has saved countless children's lives. The discrimination she faced today highlights the ongoing challenges that even the most accomplished professionals face due to racial bias." As her flight continued, Dr. Thompson received a special video message from Sophie Rodriguez, the young patient whose life she had saved the previous year. "Dr. Thompson, you're my hero," the smiling girl said. "When I grow up, I want to be just like you, brave and smart and helping people." The terminal manager, Mrs. Chen, was giving interviews to local news stations. "What happened here today was unacceptable," she stated firmly. But Dr. Thompson's response, her dignity, her professionalism, turned this incident into a teaching moment for everyone. Social media exploded with support. The hashtag Der Thompson effect was trending, with people sharing their own stories of overcoming discrimination in professional settings. Medical students of color posted messages thanking her for standing her ground and showing them what was possible. Back on the plane, Dr. Thompson received an email from the American Medical Association. They wanted her to be the keynote speaker at their next national conference, specifically addressing diversity and inclusion in medical environments. Richard Palmer, the hospital network CEO, had already set up a task force to review security protocols at all medical facilities. What happened to Dr. Thompson could have happened at any hospital, he explained to his board. We need to prevent this type of discrimination at every level. The young black girl from the terminal, whose name was Jasmine, had gone viral too. Her parents posted a video of her declaring she wanted to be a doctor, just like Dr. Thompson. The video caught the attention of several medical schools, who offered to host Jasmine for special tours of their facilities. As the flight neared Boston, Dr. Thompson received another important message. The private aviation company announced immediate changes: mandatory enhanced diversity training for all staff, review of security protocols, and the establishment of a diversity and inclusion board, with Dr. Thompson invited to be a key advisor. The in-flight Wi-Fi showed more developments. Miller's actions had sparked a nationwide audit of private aviation security practices. Other companies were rushing to review their own policies, hoping to prevent similar incidents. Dr. Thompson looked out the window at the clouds below, thinking about little Emma waiting for tomorrow's surgery. This morning's incident, though unfortunate, had started important conversations about respect, dignity, and equality in professional spaces. The flight attendant approached with one final update. "Dr. Thompson, you've been invited to speak at the National Aviation Security Conference next month. They want to use your experience to create new industry-wide standards." As Boston appeared on the horizon, Dr. Thompson realized that sometimes the worst moments could lead to the best changes. Her stand for dignity hadn't just helped her, it was helping create a better future for everyone who would come after her. When Dr. Thompson's private jet landed in Boston, she was surprised to find a group of supporters waiting at the terminal. Medical students from local hospitals held signs reading, "Thank you, Dr. Thompson," and "Excellence has no color." Among them were several of her former patients and their families. Emma's parents were there too, holding their daughter's hand. 7-year-old Emma, scheduled for surgery the next morning, wore a shirt that read, "My doctor is a superhero." When she saw Dr. Thompson, her face lit up with a bright smile. "We saw what happened in Atlanta," Emma's mother said, holding back tears. "We wanted to show you that here, you're not just respected, you're loved." Emma ran forward and hugged Dr. Thompson's legs, not seeing a doctor who faced discrimination, but simply seeing the person who was going to make her better. Meanwhile, back in Atlanta, the aviation company had taken swift action. Miller, the security guard, was officially terminated from his position. But rather than simply firing him, the company took an innovative approach to the situation. "We want to turn this negative into a positive," announced Patricia Martinez, the company's CEO, in a press conference. "We're creating a new mandatory training program called Beyond Bias. Mr. Miller's actions will be used as a teaching example of what not to do, and Dr. Thompson's response will be shown as a model of professional dignity." The terminal manager, Mrs. Chen, had implemented immediate changes. Every security staff member now wore a body camera, and new signs were posted throughout the terminal stating clearly, "We respect all passengers. Discrimination has no place here." Dr. Thompson's phone buzzed with a message from her medical school. They wanted to create a scholarship in her name, specifically for minority students pursuing careers in neurosurgery. "Your dignity in the face of discrimination will inspire generations of future doctors," the dean wrote. The young girl from the terminal, Jasmine, had started a social media movement. Using her parents' account, she created videos talking about her dream of becoming a doctor. #FutureJasmine was trending, and several medical professionals had offered to mentor her. Back in Boston, Dr. Thompson headed straight to the hospital for her pre-surgery preparations. The hospital staff had organized a small surprise for her. The hallway leading to her office was lined with photos of all the children whose lives she had saved over the years. "We wanted you to see what we see," her head nurse explained. "Not someone who can be judged by their appearance, but someone who changes lives every single day." The story continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Miller, the former security guard, made a public apology. "I was wrong," he admitted in a television interview. "My actions were based on prejudices I didn't even realize I had. I'm now taking diversity training courses and learning from my mistakes." The aviation industry was experiencing a ripple effect. Other companies began reviewing their security protocols and implementing new training programs. The incident had sparked a national conversation about professionalism, respect, and hidden biases in luxury services. Dr. Thompson received an unexpected call from the White House. The president's office wanted her to serve on a national committee addressing discrimination in professional environments. Her experience would help shape new policies and guidelines. As she prepared for Emma's surgery the next morning, Dr. Thompson reflected on the events of the past day. Her phone contained thousands of supportive messages, but one stood out, a text from her father. "You didn't just stand up for yourself today, baby girl. You stood up for everyone who ever faced discrimination and showed them how to do it with grace." The hospital's security team had prepared a special ID badge for her, one that couldn't be questioned. But more importantly, they had started a review of their own security practices, ensuring that no medical professional would face similar discrimination in their facilities. That evening, as Dr. Thompson reviewed Emma's surgical plans, a delivery arrived at her office. It was a letter from the aviation company's board of directors announcing the creation of the Thompson Protocol, a new industry standard for respectful security screening procedures. The day had started with discrimination but was ending with transformation. As Dr. Thompson prepared for tomorrow's life-saving surgery, she knew that sometimes the biggest changes come from the most difficult moments. 1 year had passed since the incident at Atlanta International Airport's private terminal. Dr. Michelle Thompson stood at a podium, addressing a packed auditorium at the National Medical Conference. The topic of her keynote speech was Excellence Beyond Barriers, creating change in professional spaces. That morning changed more than just airport security protocols. She began, looking out at the diverse crowd of medical professionals. It sparked a movement that continues to grow today. In the front row sat Emma, now 8 years old and fully recovered from her successful surgery. Next to her was Jasmine, the young girl from the terminal, wearing a white coat that the medical school had specially made for her mentorship program. Both girls beamed with pride as they watched their hero speak. The changes that had occurred over the past year were remarkable. The Thompson Protocol, originally developed for private aviation security, had been adopted by hundreds of companies across different industries. It wasn't just about checking credentials. It was about treating everyone with equal respect and dignity. The former security guard, Miller, had undergone a complete transformation. After his public apology, he had dedicated himself to anti-bias education. Now he traveled to companies sharing his story as a warning about the dangers of unchecked prejudice. "Dr. Thompson's dignity in the face of my discrimination taught me more than any training manual could," he often said in his presentations. Mrs. Rodriguez and her daughter Sophie had started a foundation called Dreams Without Barriers, which helped minority students pursue careers in medicine. Dr. Thompson served as their honorary chairperson, and they had already provided scholarships to 50 promising students. The aviation company had completely revamped its training programs. Every employee now went through extensive diversity and inclusion training with regular refresher courses. Security staff wore body cameras, and their interactions were regularly reviewed for any signs of bias. Jasmine's social media movement #FutureJasmine had evolved into a national mentorship program. Successful professionals of color now regularly visited schools in underprivileged areas, showing children that their dreams were achievable. The American Medical Association had created a new division focused specifically on addressing discrimination in medical environments. Dr. Thompson's experience had opened up crucial conversations about how even highly accomplished professionals face prejudice. Back at the conference, Dr. Thompson continued her speech. "Change doesn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it comes from standing your ground with dignity, from refusing to let someone else's prejudice define your worth." The Thompson Scholarship at her medical school had already helped 10 minority students start their journey toward becoming neurosurgeons. One of them was in the audience today, preparing to begin their residency. The private aviation industry had seen significant changes too. Security checkpoints now had clear procedures posted, and passengers could rate their experiences through a new feedback system. The number of reported discrimination incidents had dropped by 70%. Emma, fully recovered and dreaming of becoming a doctor herself, had started a children's book series with her parents called Dr. Hope, inspired by Dr. Thompson. The books taught young readers about respect, dignity, and pursuing their dreams despite obstacles. The White House committee Dr. Thompson served on had drafted new national guidelines for professional environments. These dignity at work standards were being implemented across various industries, from aviation to healthcare to corporate offices. As she concluded her speech, Dr. Thompson shared a final thought. That morning in Atlanta, I wasn't just a doctor trying to catch a flight. I was every person who had ever been judged by their appearance rather than their abilities. Today, we're changing that story, one person at a time. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Among them were medical students, seasoned doctors, hospital administrators, and even a group of aviation security staff, all united in their commitment to creating a more equitable future. Later that evening, as Dr. Thompson prepared for another life-saving surgery, she received a message. The terminal where the incident had occurred was being renamed the Thompson Terminal for Professional Excellence, serving as a daily reminder that dignity and respect should be universal. One incident of discrimination had sparked a movement of change. As Dr. Thompson looked at the photos of all the lives she'd saved, she knew that standing up for what's right, even in difficult moments, could create ripples of positive change that would benefit generations to come.